This video is a continuation from the previous video where we're building a template that allows us to spit out an invoice. So what we're going to do is just explore a few more features that we have that can just make this a little more advanced and a little more complete using new features that I'm going to talk about and some old stuff that we've already touched on. The first thing we're going to look at is a due date. So let's just take a look at a feature that I didn't touch on at the time when we were looking at the input fields, but now we can. I think we're ready. So I'm going to create a field called datetime selector, and I'm going to put in due date and make it just a date. And I'll add that. We're going to be coming back to this in a minute because this is the part where we look at. So now let's just say this company has a 30-day requirement, number of days required to pay, just so we're not ambiguous at all. So I'm going to say 30 as our default value. And I'll just move this up here just for, and what we'll do is we'll just hide this using the setting that we've touched on before. So now let's edit the due date. It's possible to dynamically change a value of a date based on other values you have in your block. So in this case, we're going to say, well, we want to add 30 days to today's date, or whatever date we're issuing the invoice. So we're going to say select the field that contains the number of days. That's the one I put in, which was number of days required to pay. That was the one that had 30. Now we're going to say select the field with the date it adds the days to. That's our date. It's the first field we put in when we created this block. So now we're going to add 30 to date, and that'll give us our due date. So when I go to the front end, as you can see, straight away it knew to add the 30 days, and that moved us into 16th of January. Supposing the person decides to change this, that will also update the due date. Of course, this can be changed manually yourself, but once you change this again, it will override it. And that's a very useful feature for being able to set different days automatically without the user having to really think about that. So that's that part. The next thing we're going to touch on is our customer list. So I put in customer name here as a field, but as you can see, we've already, in the previous video, we've already looked at the drop downs. So we might as well actually use these, use this data. So let's say choose customer category, because we've done this before. And that's the drop down from block, you might remember. And that's data from drop down from block. And we had category. There's no filtering on that. We just want to get all the categories. And now we'll update the customer name. We'll make it a radio button just to shake it up a bit. So data for drop down from other fields. And we'd say we want the customer name, and we're only going to get the category that we've chosen. And let's do the ordering and stuff as well, just to make it easier to use. So now we choose category 1, and we can say, oh yeah, let's pick B customer. Or we choose category 2, and it's like, let's pick customer 4. And that will be our value that gets passed into the invoice. The next thing we're going to touch on is a new field, which I haven't mentioned before, which is related to signature and authentication. So let's just say we were signing off on this invoice for whatever reason. So we've all this section here, user-based components, is basically fields, components that are related to information about the user, or creating users, or loading users. In this case, it's signature and authentication. So I'm going to click signature and authentication, and there's a few different options. So one of the options is uses digital signature saved in Blocworx. The next one is displays digital signature pad, and the next one is an actual authentication form that the user has to put in their username and password again, even if they've already logged in. I'm going to use displays digital signature pad, and in future videos we'll talk about how you can save signatures out of the box so they don't have to put in the signature every time. Press submit, and that's signature. I'm also going to update our template that we were working on. And we'll just put it somewhere that could be neat. I left the line. We'll just say signed, and then the name of the field was signature, so the slug is signature lowercase. And while I'm here, I'll fix that error that we had in our previous video where I didn't have the correct spelling. Save this. And now we go to manage and build templates. I'm going to delete this again. We'll just say new sample. Put in the invoice number and sample doc. That's uploaded. And for neatness, it's handiest just to edit an existing one. Now the system does assume that we've had a signature field before when the record was created. So in this case, there is nothing, so it doesn't have a signature. So I'm going to press clear, and I'm just going to sign it here. Press apply. Press update. And now when we export this file, we can see that it's signed down here. So the next thing I'm going to introduce you to is our content editing fields. So I didn't really like too much that I had to set up 4 different fields for the address lines. So instead I'm going to do something else. I'm going to delete these. I'll keep this name, address line 1. Well, actually, look, I'll change it. We'll just say address. And make this maybe half the width. So we have a section here called content editing components. And the most common one that would be used for when a user is putting in content is this one, content editor for user. What's the content editor for user? It's a way of putting in your own content, which is more than just a standard input field. So Let's show the default setting first. So when I go back to the front end and I click Open Editor, it opens an editor which allows you to put in content of, of any different format. You can even insert images into this. So for the purpose, it also shows the information down here underneath the input field. For the purpose of the invoice, we want to simplify things a bit. So for that reason, I want to change this a bit. Firstly, I'm going to use an option called Use Basic Editor. So press Submit and we'll just check out each one as we go along. I'll open a new tab and we'll just keep refreshing. So a basic editor is kind of more what we need for this particular example because we're just putting in an address. So as you can see, it doesn't have as many things. It just has a few basic stuff and that's all we want. Next option, show the editor by default. So you notice I have to click a button to open up that editor, but that's quite common that people don't want to have to click a button. Sometimes they do, but this time the editor just shows by default with that setting on. That also naturally hides the edit button because the assumption is that we don't ever want to close that editor. This still isn't perfect because when I type here, we can see the content underneath here. Sometimes that's required and sometimes we only want to see this content, but in this case, we don't need to see the content twice. So hide content display, only show editor. So now as you can see, I can type an address in here and that will come out. It's a handier way for them to type addresses and press return and do whatever they need to do. So we'll go back to our original record and we're just going to do another update. So we'll just intentionally use the different formats just for demonstration purposes. And update that. So we actually need to change this template one more time, the sample. Because we're no longer using all this information. We're just using address. Okay. So let's export. And you can see the address appear there. There's an issue there with the space, so there's sometimes a bit of trial and error between Blockworks and the Word file because you're working with a third party, so you're kind of relying on how Microsoft Word will handle your whatever you've done. So sometimes it's a matter of just adjusting the template. So there's one last thing I want to show you related to this field, and it's something I touched on a few minutes ago. So a few modules ago, we showed you about populating values from other blocks. So I'm going to do this instead of having the address here as something you type in, I'm going to change this field so that you can't actually type in anything here. So I'm going to remove show editor by default. I'm going to click hide edit button, and I'm going to untick hide content display. So now there'll be no way to access the editor. So the next thing I'm going to do is we're just going to pick a particular customer. I'm going to add an address field. So we'll use the basic editor. We'll hide the button. It doesn't really matter. There is a little issue. You have to put in some text here to submit the field, even if you don't plan on showing the button. And we'll show editor by default, and we'll hide. So what I'm doing is I'm going to set the address here instead of in the invoice itself. So let's create a new customer. We'll just say test customer. This is the address for test customer. Press submit. And we'll go back to generate invoice. And we're going to use our rule that we've showed a few modules ago. When the customer name value is set, we're going to populate the address. So customer name, populate local field with data from elsewhere, not total. Total gets counts, data just gets value. So the block we were working with was data for drop down on other fields. Usually that would be called like customer list or something. Data required is customer name. Local field to populate. Sorry, that's incorrect. The data required is address. The local field to populate is the address. That's not relevant for this one. And the field we're using to look it up is customer name. Customer name. So I'm going to create a new invoice altogether. We'll pick category 1. I would say test customer. And as you can see, the address appears here. I'll put in just a few more details. I'll add one, or I'll put in something proper here. I'll just add one line item. I've obviously moved fields around a bit here. Review units 5. Item name, test. So do a signature. Press submit. So we'll check this one out. And as you can see, this was the address that we populated from the other block, and we got it into this one. And so there's no need to ever edit it. So this could be used for lots of things like phone numbers, all sorts of things. So really the invoice system in itself could be a little cleaner by the end. Don't forget as well, you can put the due date in, any values we can. So we could always have another field called date and then due date, and all that will appear on the invoice. So I hope there's enough information here. And the next assignment is going to be building a full invoice system with everything that I've shown you. Thank you. Goodbye.